The Valori delegation arrived on Earth on a cold morning in December. Their ship descended through the gray clouds and landed on the platform outside the United Earth Military Command Center. Commander Nathan Cole stood waiting for them with his officers beside him. He had been told to expect arrogance from these aliens. He had been told they considered themselves superior to every other species in the galaxy. He was not disappointed. The Valori were tall creatures with long bodies that seemed to bend and sway like grass in the wind. They had 4 arms each, and their heads were covered in compound eyes that reflected the light like broken mirrors. Their leader was called Dexal, and he walked at the front of the group with the confidence of someone who had never known defeat. Nathan stepped forward and offered his hand in greeting. Dexal looked at it for a moment before extending one of his own appendages. The handshake was awkward, but it served its purpose. The 2 species had made contact, and now the real business could begin. The delegation was led inside the command center, where a large observation gallery had been prepared for them. Holographic displays lined the walls, showing maps of Earth and its surrounding space. Lieutenant Maria Santos walked beside Nathan and kept her eyes on the aliens. She did not trust them. She had read the reports about how the Valori had conquered 12-star systems. She knew what they were capable of. Dexal stopped in front of one of the displays and pointed with 2 of his arms. The display was showing a map of Earth's military assets. There were markers for naval bases and Air Force installations and missile silos. But what caught the aliens' attention were the markers scattered across every continent. Hundreds of them. Thousands of them. All representing the same thing. What are these? Dexal asked. His voice came through a translator device hung around his neck. The device made his words sound musical and pleasant, but Nathan could hear the contempt underneath. "Those are our armored divisions," Nathan replied. "Tank battalions." The Valori delegation exchanged glances. Their bodies began to sway more rapidly, and strange sounds escaped from the slits in their necks. Nathan had been briefed on Valori body language. He knew what this meant. They were laughing. Ground vehicles? Dexal said once the laughter had subsided. "You fight your wars with ground vehicles? Metal boxes that crawl across the dirt?" Nathan kept his face calm. He had expected this reaction. "We call them tanks. They have served humanity well for over 300 years. This time the laughter was louder. The Valori did not even try to hide their amusement. They swayed and clicked and made sounds that their translators could not properly convert into human speech. Lieutenant Santos clenched her fists at her sides, but she said nothing. She was a professional, and she would not give these aliens the satisfaction of seeing her anger. Dexal moved closer to the display and studied it with his many eyes. 3 centuries, he said. 3 centuries of crawling through mud while other species learned to fly between the stars. Tell me, Commander Cole, why do you cling to these relics? We have observed your planet for many years. We know you have spacecraft. We know you have weapons that can reach beyond your atmosphere. Why do you waste resources on machines that cannot even leave the ground?" Nathan smiled slightly. It was not a friendly smile. "Our tanks serve a purpose that your people have forgotten." "And what purpose is that?" "They win wars." The exile made a sound that the translator rendered as a scoff. "Wars against whom? Against yourselves? We know your history, Commander. We know that humans spent thousands of years fighting each other over patches of dirt and pools of water. Perhaps that is why you love your tanks so much. They remind you of simpler times when your greatest enemy was another human with a sharp stick." The other Valori found this very funny. Their laughter echoed through the observation gallery, and Nathan let them enjoy themselves. He had learned long ago that the best way to deal with arrogance was to let it run its course. Pride always came before a fall, and the Valori had more pride than any species he had ever encountered. "Lieutenant," Santos leaned close to Nathan and whispered, "How long do we have to listen to this?" "Not much longer," Nathan replied quietly. "Let them laugh. It will make the lesson more effective." When the laughter finally died down, Exal turned back to Nathan with what might have been a smile on his alien face. "I mean no offense, Commander. Your species has accomplished much in a short time. Your spacecraft are impressive for such a young civilization. Your orbital stations show real engineering skill. But these tanks of yours are an embarrassment. When the galactic community looks at Earth, they see a species that still plays with toys from a primitive age. If you want to be taken seriously, you should put these machines in museums where they belong." Nathan nodded slowly as if considering the alien's words. "I appreciate your advice, Diplomat Exal. But before you dismiss our tanks completely, I think you should know something." "And what is that?" 15 years ago, another species came to Earth. They were called the Kreth. They had conquered 9 star systems and defeated 23 civilizations. They arrived with 200 warships and millions of soldiers. They looked at our tanks, and they laughed just like you are laughing now. The swaying of the Valori bodies slowed. Nathan noticed that he had their full attention now. The Kreth were confident. He continued. They had hover tanks that could move at 300 kilometers per hour. They had energy weapons that could vaporize steel. They had force shields that could stop any projectile. They thought the conquest of Earth would take a few days at most. "We have heard of the Kreth incursion," Exal said. His voice had lost some of its amusement. "Your orbital defenses destroyed their fleet." Nathan shook his head. "No. Our orbital defenses fell within the first 6 hours. The Kreth landed their troops on every continent. They controlled our skies and our space. By every measure that mattered, they had already won. Then how did you survive?" Nathan gestured to a technician standing nearby. "Show them the files." The holographic display changed. The maps disappeared and were replaced by footage from 15 years ago. Grainy images of alien ships descending through burning skies. Kreth soldiers marching through ruined cities. Hover tanks gliding across open fields, leaving destruction in their wake. "This is the story of how humanity survived," Nathan said. "And this is why we keep our tanks." The Valori watched in silence as the footage began to play. They were not laughing anymore. The footage showed the day the Kreth arrived. 200 warships emerged from hyperspace just beyond the moon. They hung in the darkness like metal insects waiting to descend upon their prey. Earth had been watching the stars for centuries, hoping to find friendly life among them. Instead, they found the Kreth. Commander Nathan Cole remembered that day clearly. He had been a young lieutenant stationed at a missile base in the mountains. He had watched the sky turn red as the orbital defense platforms opened fire on the alien fleet. He had felt hope when the first Kreth ship exploded in a ball of flame. That hope had not lasted long. The holographic display showed the battle in orbit. Earth's missiles streaked toward the alien ships, but most of them were destroyed before they could reach their targets. The Kreth had point defense systems that could track and destroy hundreds of projectiles at once. The missiles that did get through struck energy shields that absorbed the explosions like water-absorbing stones. "Your weapons were ineffective," Exal observed. His voice was quieter now. The amusement had faded. "Yes," Nathan admitted. "We had never fought an enemy from beyond our world. We did not know how to fight in space. Our orbital platforms were designed to defend against threats from Earth, not threats from the stars." The footage showed the Kreth counterattack. Plasma beams lanced down from the alien warships and cut through the orbital stations like hot knives through butter. Debris rained down through the atmosphere, leaving trails of fire across the sky. In less than 6 hours, every orbital defense platform had been destroyed. Earth was defenseless. Lieutenant Maria Santos watched the footage with a grim expression. She had been a child during the invasion. She remembered hiding in a basement with her family while alien ships flew overhead. She remembered the sound of explosions in the distance and the screams of people running through the streets. Those memories had shaped her entire life. They were the reason she had joined the military. The display showed the Kreth landing craft descending through the clouds. Thousands of them carrying millions of soldiers. The insectoid warriors poured out onto the surface of Earth with their weapons blazing. They expected no real resistance. They had conquered 23 species before, and none of them had been able to stop the Kreth war machine. The Kreth were efficient, Nathan explained. They targeted military bases and government buildings first. They destroyed our communication networks and our power grids. Within the first day, they had killed millions of people and captured several major cities. Sergeant Major Henry Brooks stood in the corner of the observation gallery, listening to the commander speak. He had fought in those early battles. He had been 19 years old when the Kreth landed near his hometown. He had watched his friends die under alien plasma fire. He had lost his left arm to a Kreth blade before a medic had dragged him to safety. Now he wore a prosthetic arm made of metal and plastic. It was a constant reminder of those terrible days. The footage showed the Kreth advance across the continents. Their hover tanks glided over the terrain at incredible speeds. Human soldiers fired rifles and rockets at them, but their weapons could not penetrate the alien shields. Conventional military forces were swept aside like leaves in a storm. "Your armies were destroyed," Thexall said. It was not a question. "Our conventional armies were destroyed," Nathan corrected him. "But we had other forces. Forces that the Kreth did not expect." The footage changed to show a different scene. A vast plain in the middle of what had once been called Kansas. The Kreth had established a forward base there and were using it to launch attacks against the surrounding regions. They had thousands of hover tanks and tens of thousands of soldiers. They thought they were invincible. Then the ground began to shake. The Valori delegation watched as massive doors opened in the earth. Hidden bunkers that had been built decades ago during an age when humans still feared each other. From those bunkers came the tanks. Not sleek hover vehicles like the Kreth used, but massive rumbling. Machines that moved on tracks and belched smoke from their exhausts. "What are those?" one of the younger Valori asked. "M1 Abrams main battle tanks," Nathan replied. 62 tons of armor and firepower. They were first designed in the 20th century, and we have been improving them ever since. The footage showed more tanks emerging from other hidden locations. Leopard 2 tanks from the old European territories. Challenger tanks from Britain. T-90 tanks from Russia. Machines that had been preserved and maintained and upgraded for generations. Machines that the world had hoped would never be needed again. The Kreth commanders saw the tanks approaching, and they laughed. Their translators picked up the sounds of alien amusement being broadcast across their communication channels. They ordered their hover tanks to engage what they assumed would be easy targets. It was the last mistake many of them would ever make. The first Kreth hover tank fired its plasma cannon at an approaching Abrams. The bolt of superheated energy struck the front of the tank and exploded against its armor. Smoke and fire billowed around the machine. The Kreth crew waited for the human vehicle to stop moving. It did not stop. The Abrams rolled through the smoke with scorch marks on its hull, but otherwise undamaged. Then the Abrams fired back. The sound of the cannon was different from anything the Kreth had heard before. It was not the high-pitched whine of an energy weapon. It was a deep, thunderous boom that echoed across the plain. A solid metal slug traveling at 2,000 meters per second crossed the distance between the two vehicles in the blink of an eye. The Kreth shield flickered when the slug hit it. The shield was designed to absorb energy, heat and light and radiation. It was not designed to stop raw kinetic force. The slug punched through the shield like it was not even there. It struck the hover tank and tore through the alien armor from front to back. The vehicle exploded in a ball of flame and crashed to the ground. The Kreth stopped laughing. Nathan paused the footage and turned to face the Valori delegation. This was the moment everything changed. The Kreth had fought 23 species, and none of them had used kinetic weapons. Energy weapons were more advanced, more sophisticated. Every civilized species in the galaxy had abandoned primitive projectiles centuries ago. He smiled that cold smile again. Every species except humanity. The footage resumed, and the Valori watched in silence as the battle unfolded. Tank after tank rolled across the Kansas plain, firing their cannons at the Kreth hover vehicles. The aliens tried to fight back, but their weapons were designed for a different kind of war. Their plasma bolts struck the human tanks and scorched their armor, but could not destroy them. The reactive plating absorbed the energy and dispersed it across the hull. Commander Nathan Cole let the footage speak for itself. He watched the faces of the Valori delegation and saw their arrogance slowly turning to something else. Fear, perhaps. Or at least a healthy respect for what human weapons could do. Captain Linda Hayes stepped forward to provide context. She was the base historian, and she had spent her entire career studying the Kreth incursion. She knew every battle and every casualty. She knew the names of the tank commanders who had turned the tide of the war. The Kreth made several critical errors, she explained. First, they underestimated our ability to hide our most powerful weapons. Those underground bunkers had been built during the Cold War era, when humans feared nuclear annihilation. We maintained them even after we stopped fearing each other, because we knew that someday another threat might emerge. The footage showed tanks emerging from forests and mountains and swamps. Hidden bases all over the world releasing their armored forces at the same moment. It had been a coordinated counterattack planned by generals who had studied human military history for their entire lives. They knew that the element of surprise was worth more than any amount of firepower. Second, Captain Hayes continued, the Kreth relied entirely on their hover technology. Their vehicles floated above the ground using anti-gravity fields. This made them fast and maneuverable, but it also made them vulnerable. She pointed at the display where a Kreth hover tank was struggling to maintain altitude over a muddy field. The anti-gravity field was flickering, and the vehicle was sinking lower and lower. Earth's atmosphere is thick with particulates, dust and pollen and moisture. Our soil is rich with heavy minerals that interfere with anti-gravity systems. The Kreth hover tanks were designed for clean environments with stable magnetic fields. On Earth, they operated at 60% efficiency at best. Dexal watched the struggling hover tank get struck by a shell from a human. Leopard 2. The alien vehicle exploded and crashed into the mud. They could not adapt? They tried, Nathan said. But adaptation takes time. Our tanks had been designed for exactly this kind of terrain. They had tracks that could grip any surface. They had engines that could run on multiple types of fuel. They had armor that had been tested against every weapon humans had ever created. The footage showed a battle in a dense forest. Kreth hover tanks tried to maneuver between the trees, but they were too wide and too clumsy. Human tanks crashed through the undergrowth and fired at point-blank range. The aliens had no room to dodge and no time to react. They died by the hundreds. Sergeant Major Henry Brooks watched the footage with memories of his own battles playing in his mind. He had commanded a tank during the forest fighting. He remembered the smell of burning alien flesh and the sound of Kreth soldiers screaming as their vehicles exploded around them. Those sounds still haunted his dreams. The third error, Captain Hayes said, was the most important. The Kreth did not understand the psychology of human soldiers. The display changed to show interviews recorded after the war. Human tank crews sitting in front of cameras and describing their experiences. Men and women from every nation on Earth, speaking about what had driven them to fight. "The Kreth expected us to surrender," Nathan explained. "Every other species they had conquered had surrendered once their orbital defenses fell. They could not understand why humans kept fighting, even when the situation seemed hopeless." Private Rita Collins stood near the door, listening to the older officer speak. She was 22 years old and had never fought in a real war. But she had trained in the same tanks that had defeated the Kreth. She had learned from veterans who had survived those terrible battles. She understood what drove human soldiers to fight against impossible odds. "We fight because this is our home," she said quietly. The Valori turned to look at her, and she straightened her back. "Every inch of dirt on this planet belongs to us. Our ancestors lived and died here for 100,000 years. We were not going to let aliens take it from us." Nathan nodded at the young private. "That is exactly right. The Kreth conquered species that lived on multiple worlds. Species that could retreat to other planets if one was lost. Humans had only one world. We had nowhere to run. We had to fight or we would cease to exist." The footage showed the scale of the human counterattack. Tanks rolling across every continent. Battles in deserts and jungles and frozen wastelands. Human soldiers fighting with a ferocity that the Kreth had never encountered before. The aliens had superior technology, but the humans had superior motivation. "Your tanks killed their hover vehicles," Vexal said. "But what about their infantry?" "The Kreth soldiers were formidable warriors." Nathan smiled grimly. "Yes, they were. But they had the same problem as their vehicles." The footage showed Kreth soldiers trying to advance across a muddy field. They were tall creatures with hard exoskeletons and powerful limbs. On their homeworld, they could run at incredible speeds and leap over obstacles twice their height. On Earth, they struggled to move through terrain that human soldiers navigated with ease. "The Kreth evolved on a low-gravity world," Captain Hayes explained. "Earth's gravity is nearly twice what they were accustomed to. Their soldiers could barely walk in full combat gear. They tired quickly, and their joints suffered damage from the constant strain." The footage showed human infantry advancing alongside the tanks. They moved through the mud and the debris with practiced efficiency. They fired rifles that shot metal bullets at high velocity. The Kreth personal shields could stop some of the rounds, but not all of them. And the shields could not stop bayonets or knives or the hands of soldiers trained in close combat. "We did not just defeat the Kreth with our tanks," Nathan said. "We defeated them because we understood something they had forgotten. Wars are not won by technology alone. Wars are won by soldiers who are willing to crawl through the dirt and the blood and keep fighting until the enemy is destroyed." The Valori delegation stood in silence as the footage showed the tide of the war turning. Kreth forces retreating. Kreth commanders broadcasting desperate requests for reinforcement. Kreth soldiers surrendering to human troops rather than face another battle. "How long did the war last?" Vexal asked. 8 months, Nathan replied. 8 months from the day they landed to the day the last Kreth commander surrendered. By the end, we had destroyed 90% of their ground forces. Their fleet was still in orbit, but they could not win without troops on the ground. They had no choice but to withdraw. The footage ended, and the observation gallery fell silent. The Valori were no longer swaying with amusement. They stood perfectly still like prey animals that had just realized they were not alone in the forest. Vexal stood before the now dark holographic display and tried to process what he had seen. His compound eyes reflected the dim lights of the observation gallery. As he turned to face Commander Nathan Cole, the other Valori, diplomats clustered behind their leader like frightened children seeking protection from a storm. "This footage," Vexal said slowly, "it could be fabricated. Propaganda designed to intimidate potential enemies." Nathan had expected this objection. He gestured to Lieutenant Maria Santos, who handed him a data chip. This contains verified recordings from Kreth sources, their own battle footage captured by their own cameras. We obtained it after the war ended. You are welcome to examine it and verify its authenticity. Dexal took the chip and passed it to one of his subordinates. He knew the human was not lying. The Valori had their own intelligence networks, and they had heard rumors about the Kreth incursion. Rumors that the official Kreth explanation had never fully addressed. Now he understood why the Kreth had been so reluctant to discuss their defeat. "Tell me more about your tanks," Lexal said. His voice had changed. The condescension was gone. In its place was something that sounded almost like respect. Nathan nodded and activated another display. This one showed technical specifications for the various tank models used by human forces. Diagrams of armor composition and engine designs and weapon systems scrolled across the screen. The M1 Abrams was first deployed in 1980, Nathan explained. That was over 200 years ago. Since then, we have continuously upgraded and improved the design. The current version uses composite armor that can withstand direct hits from most energy weapons. The main gun fires depleted uranium sabos at velocities exceeding 2,000 meters per second. Captain Linda Hayes stepped forward to elaborate. The key advantage of kinetic weapons is their simplicity. A metal slug does not require complex targeting systems. It does not need to overcome energy shields designed to absorb heat and radiation. It simply transfers its momentum to the target. Physics does the rest. Lexal studied the diagrams with growing understanding. The Valori had abandoned kinetic weapons thousands of years ago. They had assumed that energy weapons were superior in every way. They had never considered that their advancement might have created blind spots in their defenses. Your shields, Nathan said. They work on the same principles as the Kreth shields. Correct? The Valori diplomat hesitated before answering. Our technology is more advanced, but yes. The fundamental principles are similar. Then your shields would be equally vulnerable to our weapons. Lexal did not respond, but his silence was answer enough. Sergeant Major Henry. Brooks moved to stand beside Nathan. His prosthetic arm caught the light as he gestured toward the display. I lost my arm to a Kreth blade during the siege of Denver. I was 19 years old. I had never fired a weapon in combat before that day. The Valori turned to look at the scarred veteran. Brooks continued speaking in a flat and motionless voice. After I recovered, I returned to my unit. I learned to operate a tank with one arm. I killed 37 Kreth hover vehicles during the final campaign. I watched them burn, and I felt nothing but satisfaction. He looked directly at Dexal. The Kreth took my arm. We took their empire. That is the price of underestimating humanity. Private Rita Collins spoke up from her position near the door. The sergeant major trained me. He trained all of us. We may be young, but we have learned from veterans who survived the worst war in human history. We know what our tanks can do. We know what we can do. Nathan let his people speak, because their words carried more weight than any statistics or technical specifications. The Valori needed to understand that human military power was not just about machines. It was about the people who operated those machines and the culture that had produced them. Let me explain something about humanity, Nathan said. We have been fighting each other for 10,000 years. We have fought wars over land and resources and ideas. We have killed each other with clubs and swords and guns and bombs. Every generation has produced new weapons and new tactics. Every generation has learned from the mistakes of the previous one. He began to pace slowly in front of the Valori delegation. The Kreth had been spacefaring for 8,000 years. They had not fought a ground war in over 3,000 years. They had forgotten what it meant to struggle for every inch of territory. They had forgotten the lessons that only ground warfare can teach. Captain Hayes nodded in agreement. Orbital bombardment is effective, but it destroys the things you are trying to conquer. If you want to capture a planet intact, you need boots on the ground. You need soldiers who can move through cities and forests and mountains. You need vehicles that can navigate any terrain. You need tanks, Lieutenant Santos added. Dexal looked at the humans surrounding him. He saw soldiers who had grown up in a world shaped by constant conflict. Soldiers who had inherited thousands of years of military knowledge. Soldiers who had never stopped preparing for the next war, even during times of peace. Your species is very young, Dexal said slowly. You have only been in space for a few centuries. Yet you speak as if you are the equals of civilizations that have existed for millennia. Nathan stopped pacing and faced the alien directly. We do not claim to be equals in technology or age or territory. But in warfare, we have no equals. We have been fighting since before your ancestors left your home world. We have made every mistake and learned every lesson. We have perfected the art of killing each other, and we have turned those skills against anyone who threatens our survival. The observation gallery fell silent. The Valori stood motionless as they contemplated the implications of what they had heard. Their ships were faster. Their weapons were more powerful. Their empire was larger. But none of that mattered if they could not win a war on the ground. The Kreth thought they could conquer Earth in days, Nathan said. They had superior numbers and superior technology. They controlled our orbit and our skies. But they lost because they forgot the most basic rule of warfare. And what rule is that? Dexal asked. Nathan smiled coldly. You cannot hold territory from space. Eventually, you have to land your troops and fight for every inch of ground. And when you do that, you are fighting on our terms. On the surface of a planet. In the mud and the blood and the chaos of real combat. That is where humanity excels. That is where we cannot be beaten. He gestured toward the display showing the tank specifications. These machines are not primitive relics. They are the culmination of 300 years of development. They are designed to fight and win on any terrain against any enemy. The Kreth learned this lesson the hard way. I hope your people are wise enough to learn from their example. The observation gallery remained quiet as Commander Nathan Cole finished speaking. The holographic displays had gone dark, and the only light came from the overhead panels, casting pale shadows across the floor. The Valori delegation stood in a tight cluster with Dexal at their center. They were no longer swaying with amusement. They were barely moving at all. Nathan studied the alien diplomat and waited for him to respond. He had delivered his message clearly and directly. Now he needed to know if it had been understood. The future relationship between humanity and the Valori would depend on what happened in the next few minutes. Dexal finally broke the silence. Commander Cole, I must ask you a direct question. Why have you shown us this information? We came here to negotiate a trade agreement. We did not ask for a demonstration of your military capabilities. Nathan nodded slowly. He had been waiting for this question. You are correct, Diplomat Dexal. You came here to discuss trade. But I know that trade is not the only thing on your government's agenda. The Valori stiffened slightly. It was a subtle reaction, but Nathan caught it. His suspicions were confirmed. We have our own intelligence networks, Nathan continued. We know that certain elements within the Valori hegemony have been advocating for military expansion. We know that some of your admirals believe Earth would make an attractive target. A young civilization with valuable resources and strategic territory. An easy conquest that would strengthen your position against rival powers. Dexal's compound eyes flickered in what might have been surprise. You are well informed. We have to be. Our survival depends on understanding the intentions of those around us. Nathan stepped closer to the alien diplomat. Close enough that Dexal could see the scars on his face. Scars from battles fought long ago and machines that crawled through the mud and the fire. I showed you this information because I want you to carry a message back to your government. A message for those admirals who think Earth would be easy prey. Tell them what you have seen here today. Tell them about the Kreth and what happened when they underestimated humanity. Tell them about our tanks. He paused to let his words sink in. And tell them this. If the Valori hegemony ever decides to test our defenses, they will face the same fate as the Kreth. We will meet their hover vehicles with our tanks. We will meet their energy weapons with kinetic force. We will fight for every inch of our world, and we will not stop until the last invader is dead or driven away. Lieutenant Maria Santos stepped forward to stand beside her commander. Sergeant Major Henry Brooks joined them with his prosthetic arm gleaming under the lights. Captain Linda Hayes and Private Rita Collins took their places in the formation. One by one, every human in the observation gallery moved to stand behind Nathan Cole Dodd. It was not a planned display. It was a spontaneous demonstration of unity. The Valori watched as soldiers from different ranks and different backgrounds came together to present a unified front. This was what human military culture looked like. This was the spirit that had defeated the Kreth. I understand your message, Commander, Vexal said quietly. I will convey it to my government in full detail. Good, but I want you to understand something else. Nathan extended his hand toward the alien in the human gesture of friendship. We do not want war with the Valori. We have no territorial ambitions beyond our own system. We are not conquerors. We are defenders. We built our tanks to protect our home, not to invade the homes of others. Vexal looked at the extended hand. For a long moment, he did not move. Then slowly he reached out with one of his appendages and grasped Nathan's hand. Perhaps we have more in common than I initially believed, the alien diplomat said. Perhaps we do. The galaxy is large enough for both our peoples. There is no need for conflict between us. But if conflict comes, we will be ready. We will always be ready. The handshake ended, and Vexal stepped back to rejoin his delegation. His body language had changed completely since the beginning of the meeting. The arrogance was gone. In its place was something that looked almost like caution. I will recommend that the trade agreement be prioritized, Vexal said. I believe it would benefit both our peoples to pursue cooperation rather than confrontation. Nathan nodded. I think that would be a wise decision. And I will ensure that our military commanders receive a complete copy of the Kreth incursion files, including the verified footage from Kreth sources. I would appreciate that. Vexal gathered his delegation and prepared to leave. But before he reached the door, he turned back to face Nathan one last time. Commander Cole, may I ask you a personal question? Of course. During the Kreth War, did you fight in one of those tanks? Nathan smiled slightly. It was the first genuine smile he had shown since the meeting began. The first commanded a platoon of 4 Abrams tanks during the Battle of Denver. We destroyed 62 Kreth hover vehicles in 3 days of fighting. I lost 2 of my tanks and 6 of my crew members. But we held our position until reinforcements arrived. Vexal was silent for a moment. You speak of your tanks with great pride. They saved my life. They saved my planet. Yes, I am proud of them. The Valori diplomat nodded slowly. I understand now. I understand why you keep these machines when other species would have discarded them long ago. They're not just weapons to you. They are symbols of your survival. Nathan glanced at the soldiers standing behind him, at the veterans who had fought the Kreth and the young recruits who had trained to follow in their footsteps. They are more than symbols. They are a promise that we will never forget the lessons we have learned. A promise that we will always be ready to defend our home. Vexal bowed his head in what might have been a gesture of respect. Then I wish you and your tanks a long and peaceful future, Commander Cole, and I hope we never have cause to test your capabilities for ourselves. So do I, Diplomat Dexal. So do I. The Valari delegation departed, and the observation gallery fell silent once more. Nathan stood at the window and watched their shuttle lift off from the landing platform. It rose through the gray clouds and disappeared into the sky, carrying its passengers back to their ship in orbit. Lieutenant Santos moved to stand beside him. Do you think they understood? Nathan watched the clouds swirl where the shuttle had passed through them. They understood enough. Whether their government listens to them is another matter. And if they do not listen? Nathan turned away from the window and looked at the soldiers still standing in formation behind him. His people, his family, the men and women who would fight and die to protect their world if called upon. Then we will teach them the same lesson we taught the Kreth. He walked toward the door and paused to give one final order. Lieutenant Santos, prepare the armored divisions for inspection, and make sure our Valori guests receive an invitation to observe. Santos smiled grimly. Yes, Commander. I will make sure they have front row seats. Nathan nodded and left the observation gallery. Somewhere in the distance, the rumble of tank engines echoed across the base. The sound of humanity preparing for whatever the future might bring. The sound of a species that had learned to fight in the dirt and the blood, and had never forgotten those lessons. The Valori had laughed at their tanks. The Kreth had laughed at their tanks. Perhaps someday another species would make the same mistake, and humanity would be waiting for them.